Both this video and the previous video refer to the handout on defining key terms in business ethics, as well as the supplementary non-required article by John Christian Smith on strong separatism in professional ethics, which was placed on Nexus. As was suggested in previous videos, representatives of business and industry are always lobbying society and government in an attempt to expand the normative leeway that is given to them so as to broaden the range of powers that are open to them in the pursuit of their interests. For example, the oil industry is continuously lobbying government to prevent society from erecting stricter limits for carbon emissions and other environmental regulations, or to release them from regulations that they say will hamper their drilling and pipeline activities. Tobacco companies have lobbied to influence regulatory policy over the marketing and packaging of cigarettes. Private banks in the United States successfully lobbied for overturning the provisions of the Glass-Steagall legislation, that part of the American Banking Act which separated commercial banking from investment banking, and which prevented them from engaging in proprietary trading, something that there is open to them today. Pharmaceutical corporations are constantly lobbying to keep drug prices in a certain range, to maintain control over the production of patented drugs rather than letting their drugs become generic. They're also lobbying to open new vistas for research and experimentation, for example into epigenetic drugs and therapeutic cloning. They're also lobbying to influence the scope of regulatory FDA oversight. Monsanto Corporation and other agribusinesses have had the normative leeway to play around with the genetic structure of our food for the last 20 years or so. Some of you may know that 70% of the food in the grocery store is genetically modified and not labeled or required to be labeled as such. Such biotechnology is usually employed in an attempt to increase yields and harden crops against droughts and frost. It would not be permissible for the average person on the street to play around experimenting with your food, say in their basement like that. It should be noted that Europe has largely rejected genetically modified foods, considering North America's acceptance of them as a great experiment on human subjects. More recently, Monsanto Corporation lobbied for an exemption from prosecution in American courts should the experimental genetically engineered crops that have been planted across the country be proven to cause harm to consumer health or to contribute to a crop plague due to lack of genetic diversity. The resulting contract was the Monsanto Protection Act. You might come up with 3 or 4 more examples of your own wherein business professionals or corporations have lobbied government or society for a broader range of power or to expand their normative leeway. It must be stated that there's a trade-off to be made. Because society can benefit from the critical functions that are provided by professionals, for example, from having a growing variety of useful goods and services available to them, it grants special accommodations and exemptions to business professionals from certain established societal norms. However, the public must ensure that the members of the industry or the profession in question can be trusted with the privileges, freedoms, and powers that are granted to them, and that it will not be harmed, for example, by the operations of a company or by the products that are created and marketed by entrepreneurs. This is one of the reasons for why professional associations and corporations draw up codes of conduct and codes of ethics to guide the actions of their members and to prevent abuses. You can see the 22 or so sample codes of ethics and conduct that I've placed on Nexus for your perusal, some of them from major corporations like Exxon, Halliburton, Boeing, and JP Morgan. While some professional norms are derived from ordinary societal norms, are a subset of, or are a specific instantiation of them, namely overlapping with or having their origin in them, others are truly separate. In many cases, industry representatives, or the professional associations in question, negotiate with government or society and arrive at formal contracts that set out the contours and limits of the normative leeway that's given to professionals in carrying out their critical functions. So some of the separate set of professional norms are the byproduct of negotiation and special arrangements made between industry, representing the business professions and corporations, and government, representing the public, which are enshrined in contracts. This picture of the relationship between ordinary societal norms and professional norms can be described as moderate separatism. The supplementary article by John Christian Smith on strong separatism in professional ethics that I posted on Nexus helps to provide us with an understanding of the relationship between professional norms and ordinary societal norms. In the article, Smith argues that there's truly a separate set of norms that belongs to professionals, and he outlines several models: strong separatism, weak separatism, unificationism, with which to describe the reality of the normative leeway that's given to professionals. However, he does not mention the possibility of moderate separatism. The descriptive view of moderate separatism is really a logical extension of his finding and arguably the most accurate model. On the handout, you'll find a Venn diagram type visual representation of the moderate separatism model. One might allege that when corporations and industries claim too much power, for example, when the circles there are pulled apart too much, there's too much of a separation between the norms that pertain to them and the ordinary societal norms that pertain to the average Joe on the street, and things can get out of hand. Business professionals must remember that they too are not only business professionals, but also members of the public, being affected by what their own businesses and what other businesses do. One could argue that dysfunctions in society will tend to occur when there's too much of an imbalance between the norms of the professions and the norms of the society. For example, on the one hand, professionals and corporations may not be given enough normative leeway to be able to carry out their critical functions. There might be too much regulation due potentially to a lack of trust on the part of the public. But on the other hand, professionals could be given too much normative leeway due to being given an excessive amount of trust, accommodation, and or leeway by the public, and the corporation takes advantage. The key here in a liberal society is perhaps some degree of balance. For example, a chartered accountant has a large degree of responsibility to keep the financial information of their clients confidential, but on the other hand, they are also an agent of the public. They must be trustworthy in giving accurate data in respect to valuation of the company that they're auditing. Accountants must navigate this dual responsibility in carrying out their critical function. The next video will refer to the articles by Albert Carr, Is Business Bluffing Ethical?, as well as Norman Gillespie, The Business of Ethics. Both of those you can read in the course pack, and both pertain to this notion of normative leeway.